Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Data Room. I'm super excited to be here, and today we are joined by a fabulous guest. This is Paige LaRock, one of my classmates from Baker, and actually one of my co-advisors from last year's O Week. So, Paige, why don't you go ahead and give the viewers a little bit more about yourself?
My name is Paige. I am from just south of Nashville, Tennessee. Also a sophomore here at Rice University. I am double majoring in environmental engineering and business with a finance concentration. Kind of looking forward after Rice, I've become very interested in kind of the green energy transition and exploring the intersection between kind of the engineering side of things and kind of the whole science and technology aspect of it with like actual finances. Yeah.
Awesome. So let's get right into it. The first question is, why did you agree to come on this podcast?
Um, I feel like I've heard you talk about this podcast since you like first began it. And you definitely have like exuded such extreme passion and like excitement about it. And so to have the opportunity to kind of um be a part of something that obviously like you're so excited about and has brought you like a lot of like interactions with various people and important CEOs and companies was just something that I thought was like a really great opportunity.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad you're here. So now I'm going to ask you kind of like what's been on your mind recently, and you can answer this regarding like academics, maybe like future career plans, or something else entirely.
Um, in terms of, I guess mainly it's probably kind of future career plans for me. I think that the past few weeks especially have been very instrumental in terms of me determining kind of what I want my future path to be. Um, I came into Rice as a mathematical economic analysis major, pretty quickly realized was not the world for me, transitioned over to business, and then kind of found this interest in environmental science. However, when I was taking a lot of environmental science courses, it was more of, here's a problem and not necessarily kind of being more on like the solution side of things. And so, I'd walk out of class and it's like, oh yeah, climate change is real and all of these like very bleak outlooks on life. And the transition over to environmental engineering for me was kind of a big move this past semester to kind of really identify, what I'm passionate about and what I'm enjoying. And so right now, kind of exploring more of the green energy transition. I feel like this is the first time, as stupid as it sounds, the first time that I've really been truly excited to learn about something for reasons other than like, oh, to do well on a test or oh, to do well in a class. And so I've been kind of figuring out my exact summer plans. Like I'll be likely studying hydrogen energy. And I just think that these past few months and especially the past few weeks have really motivated me in terms of looking forward into my future because for a while I definitely felt like, I didn't really know exactly what I was working towards. People would ask me like, oh, why are you double majoring in business and environmental science or environmental engineering? And I really didn't have an answer. And I feel like I'm finally beginning to kind of develop that answer. Yeah.
That's awesome. I think environmental engineering it seems really cool, and in fact, I'm actually taking a class with Paige next semester regarding environmental engineering. So I'm trying to branch out a little bit more into that field. Can you talk a little bit about what kind of things are going on in the environmental engineering space, and like what are some things you're working on?
So for sure. So I have been working in one of my classes since January with a geothermal energy startup. Um,
Called.
Criterion Energy Partners, founded by two Rice graduates. And we have been kind of exploring their future opportunities in terms of expanding beyond their current location. So currently their main geothermal plant is in East Texas. And they were kind of looking at potential opportunities in Alaska, Utah, Louisiana, but more specifically, we kind of took the approach of looking at tribal lands because there's been a lot of interesting additions through the Inflation Reduction Act related to grant money that is coming through for green energy on tribal spaces. So I've spent the past few months kind of researching opportunities in Louisiana where, the geology is right for geothermal, but just kind of understanding, is this actually a possibility to be collaborating with these tribal governments in order to implement green energy on their spaces? So I did not know much about geothermal energy coming into this semester. Definitely have learned a lot Kind of more broadly in the energy space right now, it's just drastic decreases in like cost curves for solar and wind power. And something that I'm kind of interested in looking at now, since I've expanded kind of more into the geothermal space, is there a possibility for geothermal energy to kind of follow those cost curves and become more efficient in terms of like actual pricing of kilowatt per hour? Because there are a lot of additional obstacles in terms of geology and the actual area that geothermal plants can be put in, and can they become something that's more widely effective and more widely used across the United States? I mean, they've been very effective in Iceland, um, and so there's a lot happening right now. I think in terms of expanding understanding opportunities for different sources of energy and combining them together. So that's some of the work I've been doing recently.
Awesome. Sounds like a lot of cool stuff, and definitely energy is something that's really exciting for me as I try to think about our future. So, what specifically is it about energy rather than maybe like reducing plastic waste or like other kind of environmental measures? What is it specifically about energy that really excites you?
I think it's the fact that it's ingrained into all aspects of life. Because, there's energy related to plastic use. There's energy, it's so overarching and broad. And honestly, unless we have like some very revolutionary breakthroughs in terms of the energy sector over the next few years, I mean, we're not heading in the best direction. And so, kind of understanding the necessity of it and how it has such widespread impacts on every single person on this planet is something that like really has excited and like motivated me to continue kind of understanding what our future is going to look like.
Mm. And so you just mentioned something that I think about quite a bit, which is like we're not heading in the best direction. Can you talk a little bit more about kind of what is your current view of where we are now and where you could see things potentially going in the future?
I think that right now we're in an interesting transition period of definitely understanding that change needs to occur, but there definitely are still a lot of barriers, whether it be financially, politically, socially, um, towards actually like fully accepting the transition that needs to occur, both in like the energy sector and just kind of like greenhouse gas emissions generally. And looking into the future, I think that a lot there's a lot of understood about like the direction we need to go in. I definitely think that there's a lot of really great research happening, a lot of breakthroughs occurring, but I also think that there's still a little bit of a disconnect between the research that exists and actually like connecting it to those that are in power and policymakers and those that are able to implement these changes. There's just a lot of lost time and delays making that connection. And I definitely think that that's something that needs to be improved upon, because obviously, breakthroughs are occurring, but then you're not going to see the impacts of them for 5, 10, 15 years down the road. And it's getting to the point where it's like, do we really have decades to spare? So I think that's kind of where we are right now.
Right. And what do you think it will take for kind of the policymakers or the people with the money and the influence? Like, what will it take for them to actually kind of get on board with these changes that most people kind of agree need to happen? Like, what is it going to take to really drive us towards a better future with cleaner energy and a more sustainable way of living?
I think there's a lot of very interesting different pressures that people might not initially think of. So I spent last summer working at a pretty large scale wholesale insurance brokerage. And there are a lot of insurance carriers now that are simply either refusing or like limiting their underwriting of oil and gas risks. And so there's a lot of interesting kind of additional layers to things like that where it's like, okay, oil and gas companies cannot function without insurance. And if you have carriers that are not willing to underwrite them, then it's kind of like, okay, where are we heading next? I mean, 80% of new energy that's occurring within the United States is wind and solar. So I definitely do think that, we're trending in the right direction, in terms of like understanding that that transition needs to happen. Um, but in some ways, I mean, there's still a lot of challenges in terms of like politics and finances that I personally am not like fully fit to completely solve. If I could solve them, I would. But I do think that there's a lot of pressures, like such as like insurance, that typically aren't thought of immediately as like, oh, this is something that's going to cause companies to be willing to make this change.
Now, what would you tell someone, maybe a younger version of yourself, someone who's maybe in middle school, elementary school right now that is interested in clean energy and kind of thinking about the future? What advice would you have for them?
I would say enter it. I mean, it's only a growing space right now. I definitely think that this is like such a large area that is only going to continue to grow. And obviously, there's a lot of uncertainty in it. But in some ways, I think that that uncertainty proves to be beneficial because there are so many opportunities for growth. Um, it's not like this is a I don't think you're ever really going to hit the like maximum in terms of a workforce or maximum in terms of like people kind of looking into this space. And I just think there's a lot of opportunity, and there's a lot of different intersections and interdisciplinary aspects of it. And so, looking into green energy, it's not like you need to be an environmental engineering major. It's like you can be in political science, you can be in computer science, you can be, I mean, you've got to have people who are like English majors and communications majors that are able to kind of connect this information to a broader audience. And so the interdisciplinary aspect of it, I definitely think is something that is really, really important to kind of ingrain in people's minds that, like you can be involved in non-engineering, non-STEM technology fields and still be playing a very vital role.
That's awesome. Very powerful and inspiring words, Paige. Now, on the flip side, what would you say to the people that are currently at the top of energy companies, whether it's a green energy company or maybe a fossil fuel company? Like, what would be your message to them?
Um, in terms of like top of like more fossil fuel based companies, I think that they're aware of, I mean, they're obviously aware of what needs to happen. And I think that it's knowing that this transition's probably needs to occur faster than a lot of people are like assuming. Um, and just being willing and open to new technology and kind of again bridging that gap between research improvements that are being made and their actual practices when they're like put into place.
Awesome. So we've been talking quite a bit about green energy and your interest in that space, but now I want to talk a little bit more, just kind of about the day to day of kind of your life. So, what are some habits that you've adopted over the years that you think have been important in some of your successes?
Um, Something I've been getting back into that used to be a habit for me a lot in high school was just running. I used to run cross country. I've always loved running. I faced a lot of injuries kind of late in high school. But for me, that's something that's always kind of allowed me to take a step back, clear my head, kind of reassess like what I need to get done. I live currently in an apartment complex with a gym on the first floor. The amount of times that I'll go down at 12:31 in the morning when I'm not being productive and I have things to do and just go run a few miles on the treadmill. And it's like it's probably not the best for my sleep schedule. But I mean, even last week there were multiple days that I was just not being productive and I was like, you know what, I'm gonna go take 45 minutes and go on a run. And so that for me is definitely a habit that I think I kind of lost at some points last year. And it's one of those situations where it's like, do I really have this much time to give up when I have that many things to get done? But in retrospect, like after I go and I run and I come back and I'm doing work, it's like I'm being so much more productive in such a smaller, condensed amount of time because I did take that break. I did, exercise, clear my head. And so that for me has been a major thing that I've been trying to get back into, especially this semester.
Yeah, I started running late at night, senior year of high school. I would go out like 11 p.m. and my dad would just be like, "See you, bud," and I'd just go out and run for like an hour or two. And I would even do like 10 miles sometimes. Just it's a really great way to kind of clear your head. Just I would either like blast music if I was really trying to run fast, or if not, just maybe like listen to a podcast or listen to a YouTube video while I'm running. It's definitely a great way. It's very satisfying to like cover distance.
Yeah,
It's great to like look back, look at your time, see your improvement.
it's very grounding.
Yeah, absolutely. So beyond running and more on the physical side, are there any other kind of habits that you picked up?
um, I've become a major Google Calendar person this semester. I was always someone who was more of a physical planner person previously. I'm very much so like a notes, pen and paper kind of person. I don't type my notes. I've never been someone who I don't know. I always appreciated like having a physical planner. But especially this semester, I think that my time has just gotten so much more it's got to be allocated very differently than previously. And I've had a lot of kind of group work and projects and meetings and things this semester. And so for me, really being able to start my day kind of sitting down and realizing, okay, this is what I need to do. And, in some ways, I think that I'm still bad at like allocating all of my time. Like I definitely have hours upon the day that, I'm procrastinating doing work that I probably should be doing at that point in time. But I definitely have kind of seen the value in terms of like adding more structure to my day and planning out more of my time compared to saying, oh, here's 4 hours that I'm going to do homework. It's okay. These first 2 hours I'm going to spend on this, and the second 2 hours I'm going to spend on this. And I definitely think that that has made me kind of more of an organized and just more effective and efficient with my time use because my free time is very, very limited currently. And so I think that that has been something that has been very, very helpful.
Mm. Like, going off that, one of the things I remember you saying when you were kind of giving advice to the new students during O week was that you're the kind of person that like you always feel like you have something you could be working
Yep.
on, and it's kind of hard to be complacent and take some time for yourself. And I would definitely agree. I think just whether it's academic or outside the classroom, there's always something like I could be doing that's moving me closer to my goals. So how do you balance kind of that feeling of like always wanting to work towards your goals with also just taking some time for yourself, for your friendships? Like how do you balance that out?
Not to like get all deep all of a sudden. But I at the end of my freshman year, so last year, I was facing some pretty challenging like mental health situations, and was just not doing very well in terms of like my outlook on my time at Rice and just kind of like my workload in classes. And I just kind of, to be blunt, crashed and burned second semester last year. And I think that that taught me a lot about finding value in things that you know are going to kind of make you happy and provide joy in your day. And so I think that this year I've been a lot more conscientious about the fact of like, oh, okay, maybe if I don't spend this hour studying for this exam, I might have, a few points lower of a grade, but am I willing to sacrifice 2 or 3 points on an exam in order for my like long-term well-being and my long-term like more happiness? I guess I just kind of had this moment where I was like, okay, if I completely burn myself out in terms of workload, in terms of studying, because there's always something I can be studying and doing, that's not sustainable in the long term. And that's going to come back to like harm me in the long term compared to, I might have this short term gain of, getting a 95 on an exam compared to getting an 87. But looking forward weeks, months into the future, if I'm continuously doing this, then it's just not a sustainable practice to the point where at some point I'm going to completely burn out. And so I think that kind of accepting that fact has been something, especially this semester, that's been really big for me. And making a conscious decision to take time to, spend time with my friends. And like, for example, like yesterday, I was about to take an exam. I had about 2 hours left. Instead of studying, I went and sat outside and talked to people. Just because I knew at that point, like, I just needed to separate myself from my work and just kind of take some time for myself.
It's awesome. Definitely, I agree. It's very important to take time to make time for your friends and like your activities, like your sports, your games, whatever makes you happy. It's definitely very important to take time for those things and like especially with building relationships with other people. Like if you're always just focused on your own work, your own things, like you're gonna miss out on there's so much benefit that other people can provide. And it's very fulfilling to make new friendships and develop deeper connections with people. So it's really important to spend time on those type of things. And I want to shift it a little bit. Walk us through your general sleep schedule.
Okay. I will admit that I definitely lack sleep to a very extreme level. I'm also someone who like I've gotten used to running on very little sleep, which probably isn't great. I typically now probably go to bed around 1:30 in the morning. And then depending on the day, I mean, I've got an 8 a.m. this semester, so I'm up at probably 6:45, 7 o'clock. Um, there are days that those few hours of sleep are fewer. There are days that I unintentionally will like fall asleep doing homework at 11 p.m. But I think that for me, I know that I'm capable of functioning pretty well on low levels of sleep. I mean, obviously it's not the healthiest situation, but like I know that I'm able to sacrifice sleep and, make it through a day on 2 or 3 hours and be totally fine. And then just I'm definitely someone who like catches up on rest on the weekends. But I also just think that that's because it's how it's been for me for years. I mean, I came from high school that was infamous for having hours upon hours of work and just having very high workloads. Like, honestly, my workload in college is a lot less than high school for me. And I just, I definitely should be getting more sleep. um, and I definitely think that that is something that I probably should become more focused on. But also, I am oddly very productive from like the hours of like 11 p.m. until like 1:30 in the morning. And so that's always been some time that like I'm able to kind of sit down and really like focus and grind out work. I also in high school got into the practice of if I knew that I was going to be a time that I was going to be getting very few hours of sleep, I would, stop work at 1 in the morning or something, go to bed for 3 or 4 hours, and wake up in the morning and do work. Because also, if you only have a certain amount of hours before you have to go to class, before you have to go somewhere, you have to get the work done. You don't have any other option. And so that was something for me that if I knew I was being unproductive late at night, it was just, okay, I'm going to go to bed, wake up in the morning, and get through this as quickly as possible. So,
Yeah, I mean, kind of a different experience than myself. I would definitely generally strive to get 8 hours. But
I
for me,
respect that.
it's not always possible though. That's the thing. Is like
Yeah.
I do at times miss out on certain things that are happening late at night because I choose to go to bed earlier. But definitely some days it's not possible, especially in college, there's going to be meetings and things scheduled into the 10, maybe in the 11s at night. What advice would you give to me and maybe the other viewers in terms of like how do you function off little amounts of sleep?
Um, Interestingly, I was never someone who was big on caffeine. I never drank coffee until rice. I never that wasn't like my source of like functioning off of little sleep. In some ways, I don't really know how I'm so effective at it. I just think it's because it's been something that I had to get used to. Especially like in high school, like I was a speech and debate kid. I was traveling every single weekend to random states and cities. So it was like I would go through a week of school and then I would hop on a flight or hop on a bus at 4 in the morning. And I just didn't really have time to catch up on rest. Um, I also think a part of it, as counterintuitive as it seems, on days that I'm really tired, the like busier that I am and more packed that my schedule is, I'm in some ways more effectively able to get through the day because I don't really have that downtime to be like, wow, I'm really tired. Like, wow, I could go take a nap or something. And it's more of like, okay, I just one thing after another and it kind of keeps your mind off of it. Obviously, caffeine is an option. I will admit that I have become a coffee drinker from rice out of necessity. But yeah, that's probably all I've got on that.
Yeah, I'm definitely the kind of person where if I'm not like, if my schedule isn't fully blocked out, I might tend to take a nap when I'm feeling really tired. My family, my mom is a very big napper as well, so it kind of rubbed off on me, I think. But I agree, when you feel like more busy and you can really remain engaged, even if you are tired, you don't even think about, you don't have time to think about the fact that you're tired and you're just constantly working. So I definitely agree with that. Um, so the next question is, what is the best advice you've ever received?
um, I think that it probably partially goes back to kind of what I touched on before about taking time for yourself and not always having to be kind of working and working consistently. Like back at the end of my freshman year, like I had a lot of conversations with people who are kind of like helping me through what I was going through. And it was more of understanding, like you said, like the value in friendships and relationships with the people around you, because those are the people who are going to be there to build you up and support you. And understanding that there's a balance between working 24/7, and obviously you want to be putting your all into things, but not to the point where it's like diminishing returns. Because I do think that there reaches a point where it's like you're working so hard that the benefits kind of begin to fall and the costs are increasing. And so understanding kind of that balance of diminishing returns, I think, is really, really important just in terms of your outlook on work and your outlook on life and how you spend time. So I think it kind of all wraps back around to that.
For sure, definitely great advice. And something I want to say is I think it's really good that you're thinking about it from the perspective of like I'm working too hard rather than not enough.
Hmm.
Is I think it's definitely easy to just kind of go throughout your day, just lollygag around, not really like focus on your goals and focus on, what you came to college to do or why you're in a certain job. Like it's easy to kind of just do whatever, but overworking and then like pulling back, I think is a much better um, approach if your goal is to really achieve something big. So maybe even if we're still working on finding that optimal balance, like at least we're tending more towards working hard. So I
Yeah.
think that's a really good thing.
Because I also think that, like, I'm someone who I tend to, I look back on things and I'm like, oh, I could have done more. Oh, I could have done this, I could have done that. But getting out of that mindset, because, in the moment when you're doing whatever you're looking back on, you think that you're putting your all in a lot of times. And so kind of talking myself out of that world was something that I think was very pivotal for myself in terms of like time allocation and like academics in general.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point. It's like I think it's really important, like the narrative you tell yourself.
Hmm.
If you are telling yourself, like, in this moment, I should have worked harder or whatever, it's going to be degrading over time. It's really important to recognize, like, in the moment, you gave it your best with what your current level of information, the current situation, you gave it your best. And if you didn't give it your best, then that's when you have to kind of be honest with yourself and like push yourself harder next time. But if you're in the moment, you're really pushing yourself to the max, you're doing the best with what you can when you look back, like fair enough, maybe you could have handled the situation differently, but as long as you know in that moment you gave it your all, I think that's a really positive thing. And now kind of just moving on, what has been your biggest failure and what have you learned from that experience?
Um, hmm. I think that in some ways, um, I don't know if I would technically really fully classify this as a failure, but more of something that I like kind of regret looking back on, like my time in high school. I think that I spent so much time so like strictly focused on academics and wanting to go to a great college and focusing on extracurriculars and everything that like the typical like ideal high school student is going to do, that I lost the ability to kind of really explore disciplines and kind of areas that I was actually interested in. When I came into Rice, I felt like a lot of people around me like really knew what they loved, and it was not necessarily something because they learned in high school. It was like, oh, this is what I look into in my free time, this is what I'm passionate about. And I'd never really given myself that free time to kind of explore it. I felt like I was God, coming into Rice with a whole bunch of people who were like, oh, they had done a whole bunch of work related to the medical field, or they code in their free time, or were super into finance. And I never really was able to take that time and allocate it towards really looking into things that I was interested in. And so, in some ways, I felt like I was a few steps behind people. People knew what they wanted to do after graduation, or like they think they know what they want to do. And for me, now I'm sitting here sophomore year, and I feel like I'm finally actually determining what I'm interested in and what I enjoy learning about outside of the classroom. So, I don't really know if you could classify that as a failure in terms of like my practices in high school and my focus, but more of something that I wish that I kind of changed, because I do think that I would kind of be not necessarily further along, but more understand what I want my future to look like a little bit more. Because I also think that definitely last year and even like last semester, it was very difficult for me to kind of stay motivated looking into my future because I didn't really know what direction I was going in. I didn't know what I wanted to be doing. And even now, like I still don't, but I think that spending time kind of earlier, understanding, hey, I'm going to take some time to really determine what my interests are is something that I really regret not doing.
Yeah. Well, two things I want to say to that. First of all is I definitely don't think it's a failure. Like if you made it to Rice, you did something right. I think that's something I think about. I was thinking about a lot freshman year, like when I first was at Rice. Like I pretty much always wanted to go to Rice. I grew up in Houston, like that was my goal. And like I worked like really hard in high school. Like maybe I spent too much time on homework and like academics and stuff. But like once I was here, like I realized that even if I felt like I spent too much time on it, like whatever I did, it worked, you
Yeah.
know? Like whatever you did, it worked. You got to
Yeah.
Rice. And my second thing I want to say is like I know like it might feel like everyone around you kind of knows exactly what they want to do. But first of all, like they're still figuring it out, but also like you're still young. Like you have a lot of time left. Like even college is a good place to just explore different interests. Like people say that a lot about like middle school, you just try different sports, and then high school, try different academic interests. But college is still a huge opportunity to just try a ton of new things. So definitely, don't feel like you're behind or anything. Like everyone's on their own kind of path, and we're all just in this together. Like we're all finding our own way, and it'll all work out.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, if you told me 2 years ago that I would be majoring in environmental engineering, I would not have believed you in any way, shape, or form. So I guess, yeah, I mean, I have definitely taken time to kind of explore things more in college, which has been good. And yeah, I mean, going back to being at Rice, like for me, like I pretty much had the opposite experience of you. I did not know what Rice was for so long. And then I was doing college searches kind of during COVID and went on this 3 day trip of just like basically touring a few colleges that I was interested at. Came to Houston, it was pouring down rain, it was like 50 degrees, campus was like shut down. I was wandering around and I was like, nope, this is where I want to be. So yeah, for me it was kind of the opposite. But now I do think that I when I'm even just walking in between class and I'm like really stressed and have a million things going on, I kind of take a step back and I'm like, okay, like I'm here, I'm where I wanted to end up. And I think that keeping that in mind is important.
Yeah, for sure. In terms of like kind of grounding yourself and realizing where you are, like freshman year, every morning I would wake up and look outside my window and just be like, wow, like I'm at Rice, like I made it here, I'm here.
You walk out of the library late at night and you walk into the academic quad and
Yeah,
you're like,
exactly.
yep, I'm here.
Exactly. The academic quad. There's something about the academic quad. It's just like that's like the I guess most picturesque part of Rice. Like every time I walk through it, it's always nice to just have a little bit of a reminder. Like this is what I was working towards and I made it happen. And it's kind of a good reminder that if I set my mind to something, I can achieve it. And it's
Mhm.
really good for kind of looking at future goals as well. So now I want to ask you, this is a new question for the podcast. It came about in Zero to One by Peter Thiel, who's an angel investor, first outside money in Facebook, part of the PayPal mafia, just tremendously successful guy. And he opens his book Zero to One with this interview question. What is an important truth that you believe in that most people disagree with?
Um, Something I was kind of thinking about that I don't know if it really directly answers that question in the way that I'm going to phrase it, but I think that like the idea and the message behind what I'm going to say kind of answers that question is I feel like so often people kind of have this idea that, like, oh, if something's not benefiting my goal or something's not benefiting me right now, like I'm going to remove it from my life. And I think that like having that focus of like, oh, I'm only going to keep in practices and keep in whatever of like things that I like view as like benefiting me can in some ways turn to be detrimental. Because I think in some ways at that point you kind of end up not necessarily like objectifying your life, but more of like, oh, you lose value in things that, you don't see. Like kind of going back to the whole idea of like, oh, you need to have something to like provide joy in your day and strengthening relationships and friendships. And it's like if even if you don't view those as something that's gonna like help you in like your long term, whatever future career goal or life goal or anything, I think that keeping those aspects of your life are very, very important. And I think that so often when people are looking to like improve their life, it's like, oh, I'm going to get rid of things that I don't view as benefiting me. But I think that changing that idea of like what benefits you is really important. Um, because or else you're going to become so progress driven again that you're going to get to the point where you're like, oh, I'm never doing enough. And I think it creates kind of a really bad cycle. So I don't know if that really like directly answers that question, but I think that like sentiment kind of answers the question. So
Yeah. Well, that's a really interesting perspective. I think you brought up some really great points. Like you can if you always just think about only like your long-term goal and just kind of cut out anything that's not part of it, it's like in the short term you might feel like you're doing yourself a favor, like you're really trying to be locked in. But also, you're missing out on so many other amazing aspects of life, and like maybe some interest or some random club that you happen to be in, it ends up becoming a bigger interest later on, and maybe that would have set the stage for that interest. And I mean, somewhat ironically, as I just brought up that example, like next semester, I'm thinking about, removing myself from some clubs so I can be a little bit more focused on my goals. But I think the point definitely still stands. Like,
mhm,
it's about finding a balance between pursuing your goals for a large portion of the day and making sure that a lot of the activities you're involved in are helping you get there, but also kind of branching out and becoming a more well-rounded person and not only locked in onto one thing.
mhm,
And some people may disagree. Even Peter Thiel, who this question came from, in his book, he talks about how nowadays high schools are pushing students to become super well-rounded and like very well. He said something about like they're very well prepared for nothing specific. It's like they're kind of just generalists, and there's definitely a lot of merit to becoming an expert in one thing. But I think from a human perspective, like it's important to recognize we're not robots, we're not machines, like we are human,
mhm.
and it's really important to have some diversified interests. Definitely, I'm very goal driven. Like definitely, it's important to keep your goals as your priority, but it's also somewhat important to make sure that you're kind of spreading yourself out into a few other things as well. And so now we're almost out of time. We're gonna kind of hit our last two questions. So the first question is, what is something you want to tell me personally?
Um, that's a tough one. I think that okay, I think that a lot of it kind of like I have honestly been very inspired by like your outlook, I think, on the future and on like motivation. And I think that, like I make fun of you sometimes for turning everything into like a motivational speech. And you're like, oh, I'm a motivated person, but like realistically, like I do think that like your ambition and your passion towards your goals is very admirable and is something that those around you also benefit from. Um, and I just think that that's something that like cannot be underappreciated. Because I definitely think that people feed off the energy around them, and kind of you're just always excitement and like you obviously love what you're doing, and I think that that is something that is like very very admirable and very motivating for like people around you. So
Yeah, well, I'm glad to motivate you a little bit. I mean, that is actually something I think about. It's not purely just unconscious or just like natural. Like I do try to be a certain person, like I think there's different versions of yourself. Like I try to be a certain version of myself that I think will best help me reach my goals. Like I do try to inspire other people. I think one of the things that really bothers me is I think a lot of people, even at Rice, which kind of surprised me at first, but I think a lot of people just think too small. I
mhm.
think people, again, especially at Rice, kind of tend to just their like overarching ambition is just like their first job out of college, and it's like, yes, that's very important. You should work hard, to get the dream job you want out of college, but there's so much more. There's so much more. Like we were talking a little bit about how the world's headed in a certain direction, and I mean, I truly believe it's like up to our generation to really make a difference. And so I just want to try to inspire that in other members of my generation because like again it this might we might be the last real generation with the power to fix things, so everything in my power to kind of push us in that direction I really want to try. do that.
I think it goes back to it's like your goals almost should like intimidate you to some extent. Yeah, and I think that like if they're not, then I don't really know if you're thinking big enough. So,
Sure. Well, that's wise words for sure. And now the last question: what is something you want to tell the viewers?
um, I think this kind of goes back to like my whole idea, like, oh, like what's something that's been on your mind recently is I would just say that like continue, regardless of your age, regardless of where you are in terms of school, regardless of kind of any of those kind of more categories, aspects of life. I think that like continuing to explore different disciplines and really try to find something that you really truly enjoy. Because for me, like I said, like I've really kind of figured out over the past few weeks like what I enjoy learning about and what I enjoy allocating my time to beyond the classroom. And it's been a really, really refreshing and motivating experience. And I think it really just helps you kind of find purpose in the work that you're doing. And so I think my words of wisdom to the viewers is just don't be kind of don't like lose motivation and don't lose kind of any drive or passion that you have towards things if you haven't really figured out like what exactly you want to do or what exactly you truly enjoy doing, both in like a professional sense or even just like in your free time, your hobbies. I think that there's a lot still that people are continuously able to learn, and it's a really kind of, like I said, refreshing and kind of more motivating experience, once you really determine what you actually truly love. So yeah.
That's a really great perspective. Just I think a lot of people are their main advice or the typical advice to the viewers, would be, do what you love, but not everyone necessarily
Yeah,
has
not
found what they
everyone
love,
knows.
right? So yeah, again, like Paige said, if you haven't yet found that, don't worry. There's still time. Just keep exploring, keep finding out, like keep trying new things to see what engages you, what piques your interest, and definitely everyone has something. Everyone has something that they can really get behind and stand for. But yeah, with that, Paige, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on the
Thank
Data
you for
Room.
having me.
And yeah, and that concludes this episode of the Data Room. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.